Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever time it is that you're watching today. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Peachy. Today I am rocking the Macho Man Randy Savage old school t-shirt. And the reason for that is because today we are going to go back. We're going to go back to 1985 when, in my opinion, the greatest action figures ever were produced. Some people might say they're not action figures because they don't have any articulation. But in my opinion, I still think they're action figures, and not just action figures, but the greatest action figures of all time. Mainly because they're a little bit different. What I'm talking about is these amazing figures here. The LJN Wrestling Superstars. Pretty much the first ever WWE wrestling figures that were ever produced. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to go back, and the thing we're going to look back to today is how much the wrestlers were actually paid for having their wrestling figures produced. So we're going to use a bit of information from various sources. So we're going to go pretty much use the Brutus Valentine Wrestling Superstars Bible. So if you haven't got that book yet, do pick it up. It is an amazing read. Still getting through it. So much information there. I've had it for a long time. I still haven't gone through it all. But we're also going to use various sources from the internet in terms of how commission was or is given to the wrestlers in the WWE. So using that information, we're going to have a bit of an estimate on what they were actually paid. And obviously this will vary depending on when the figures were produced.
Wrestlers get a 25% royalty on all their merch sales. That sounds like a lot, but that 25% is only on the profit, not the total cost.
So as you can see there, generally speaking, the WWE pay their wrestlers, in terms of royalties, 25% of the profits. So if something sells for $25 and there's a profit of $5 on that t-shirt, the wrestler is making $1 per t-shirt. Something sells for $100, you generally think that the wrestler's making roughly $4, but obviously certain wrestlers would have their own merchandise deal, which is probably a little bit higher than 25%. So I'm guessing someone like Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, Stone Cold, Steve Austin, all those bigger names may have had a bigger percentage of their sales in those deals. But we're going to base it roughly on about 25%. That's going to be the figure we use in terms of the royalties. But obviously, like I said, someone like Hulk Hogan, huge deal in the 80s, early 90s, he's probably going to get a bigger commission based on these figures. So in 1985, the WWE, or LJN more specifically, released season or series 1. It included about 5 different figures. And back in this time, the WWF, WWE was going absolutely crazy. That MTV also giving them publicity. And pretty much every kid back in the 80s pretty much would have owned a Hulk Hogan if they did own an LJN. Even if they weren't huge fans of wrestling, I know a lot of my friends did own this figure. And obviously Hogan's deal in terms of the LJN would have been a lot higher than pretty much the other guys in the series. And we're going to base this around the sales figures from this book. So the estimated sales figures you can find in the Wrestling Superstars book. I'm not going to go into it because I don't want to give too much away. But that's pretty much what the figures we've based on, the estimated sales of each figure, which I kind of agree with for the most part on this book. I think this book's got a pretty good accurate figures on overall sales at the time. And that's what we're going to be basing this around. So as I said, in 1985, Series 1 was released, and WWE was pretty much the height of its popularity. Everyone was pretty much buying anything they could WWF. And I remember being a kid going into the shopping centre. And I'm pretty sure I grew up in WA, and I think we must have got Series 1, 2 and 3 pretty much all at the same time. Obviously back in the early 80s, shipping was a little bit different, and it just seemed like we got one big hit of figures. So I think it was Series 1, 2 and 3, and I pretty much remember buying and hiding some of those figures in the shop so I could pick them up later. and I was absolutely gobsmacked at these figures. I just absolutely loved them. So the first figures we're going to go to is Series 1 and maybe 2, and they pretty much roughly sold 500,000 figures each for, I guess, most of the figures. Obviously Hulk Hogan's sales sold a lot more than 500,000, but your normal guys, when I say Series 1, I'm going to include guys like Brutus, the Beefcake, Greg the Hammer. No, they're not Series 1, but in that time frame. So we're judging it around 500,000 figures selling, and we'll see what the Greg the Hammer Valentine basically said how much him and Beefcake did make from the sale of these figures.
I had one for like $120,000 in one check. This is for that LJN dollar you're talking about. And Brutus, same thing. And we forgot what we came here to talk about.
So as you heard there, Greg the Hammer Valentine and Brutus Beefcake each received $120,000 in royalties from their action figure, the LJN action figure. And we're trying to say that they roughly sold about 500, maybe to 600 figures, 600,000 figures in that time frame. So we're pretty much, most of those guys that aren't, I guess, considered superstars, you'd say between Series 1 to 3, that's kind of when the figures were selling pretty much all the time. We're going to say that most of those guys would have made 120,000 American money or American dollars in that time. But obviously Hulk Hogan, we've got estimates that he probably sold about 2.1 million figures. So he's probably earned, and probably had a different commission or royalty rate at the time. So I'm going to say that Hulk Hogan probably earned close to $1 million just off his LJN figure alone. That's just from Series 1. That's this figure here. Hogan probably earned about $1 million just from that figure. But Hogan also had a couple more figures produced in that time. So he had these two figures, which were later series. So they didn't sell as well. When I say didn't sell as well, they were pretty hard to get, because by this time the WWE was dying down, and these figures were also pretty hard to get and still are. So you could probably say that these also probably made him another maybe $500,000, maybe more. So he probably made about $1.5 million just off his LJN figures alone. And you got to think this is back in the early 80s, mid 80s. So that is a lot of money. So to earn pretty much 1.5 million, doesn't sound like a whole lot of money now. Well, it is, but it doesn't sound like as much as it should be. But based off, you know, inflation rates and all that type of thing, $1.5 million in 1985, 86, 87 is a lot more than it is, you know, it is a lot of money. So we're saying Hogan went 1.5 million, and most of the other guys from Series 1 to 3, probably about 120,000. Macho Man, another figure, and Roddy Piper also sold a fair bit. So we're going to say that they probably made $150,000, $160,000 in royalties from their LJ action figure, if that makes sense. So after Series 3, the WWF, WWE, what do you want to call it, was kind of losing a bit of popularity. So the hype had kind of been dying down for a little bit, and LJN had also produced pretty much the most popular guys, and I was starting to release some of the, I guess, mid-card type wrestlers. And obviously with the hype among WWE being down, plus having guys that weren't household names, the sales did drop a fair bit. And they ended up dropping to around where figures were produced around 250,000 figures in sales. And so going by what the royalty that Valentine Beefcake got, you can pretty much work out that the guys between Series 4, maybe 5, were paid roughly probably about $50,000 for their figures, based on about that $200,000 to $300,000 figure rate. So anything from Series 3, 4, I'm saying they probably got paid about $50,000, $60,000 in royalties from their LJN figures. But a lot of managers, they were released in the earliest series as well, and for some reason they sold a fair bit. They were always available, and I think they sold or had estimate sales of about 500,000. So I'm guessing some of the managers, so guys like, we'll say Captain Lou, Fred Blassie, say Mean Gene Oakland, even though he's a commentator, and those type of guys. Jimmy Hart, a lot of their figures were produced quite early in the series, and I'm guessing a lot of these guys would have earned a lot more than the actual wrestlers in the later series based on royalties and them assuming they're getting the same royalties as the wrestlers. So a lot of those managers may have earned $100,000 in royalties from their LJN action figure. So in the last couple of series of LJN, the sales weren't as high, and in the 89 series especially, they were very hard to buy. Pretty much you couldn't really get them anywhere besides Canada, and I think New Zealand for some reason got them, but they're pretty much a mail away. So you had to buy WWE magazine, write in, and pretty much buy it online if you wanted it, if you lived outside of Canada, because LJN had been sold, taken over by another company then, and for some reason they only produced probably about 50,000 figures of each of the 89 series, which is the last series they produced. That was these type of figures here. So these figures here, really hard to get figures, and obviously the less sales meant they'll be getting less royalties. So based around $50,000 on sales using the royalty figures that we've kind of used with 25% of the profits, I'm saying the wrestlers on these guys, even though these figures were about $16 each by this time, whereas series 1, I think they're about $7. So these were almost double the price. So I'm using that as well. So I'm saying the guys in the 89 series were probably paid around $30,000 to have that $50,000 production run. So again, sales at the time weren't as high, and obviously trying to get those figures was pretty hard, even if you lived in the United States, which you would have thought or assumed would have been easy to get. So as you can see, it pretty much depended on when the wrestlers' figures were produced. The ones that were produced early in the 85, 86, 87 type years when WWE was absolutely crazy, those guys did earn a lot more than the guys did in the later years when I guess WWE was a little bit losing its popularity. But we can pretty much work out they did make 25% of all profits based off their royalties. But at the time, you just got to look at WWE magazine at the time. So we've got an old WWE magazine. Look at Hulk Hogan, a whole page of merchandise there. He'd be absolutely raking it in, getting 25% of that. Look, even the Ultimate Warrior, he hadn't been around for too long when this magazine was released, only a few years, a couple of years. But again, merchandise sales for him would have been through the roof. But going by just the action figures alone, the royalties, the Brutus Valentine Wrestling Superstars Almanac book, we can pretty much work out that apart from Hulk Hogan probably earned close to $2 million, $1.5 million I'm going to say, in royalties, whereas the other guys made about $120,000 if they were series 1, 2, 3, and then guys in series 4, 5, probably around the $50,000, $60,000 mark. And I have heard that a lot of the wrestlers were able to buy a nice car from their royalty check when they did get the, I guess their commission check or the royalties. They could actually afford a nice car. So the wrestlers did earn a lot of money from the LJN royalties. And we've got to think about it, it's back in the 80s. So this money is 80s money, not current 2002 type pay scale. So you've got to think of the inflation back then, what you could buy for $60,000, $120,000, $500,000, $1 million back at the time. It's obviously a lot more than what you can buy now. So these guys earned an absolute killing off the LJN figures. That's all I've got for today. It's a video that no one's really covered, but I think it's a topic a lot of people are curious about. So thanks for watching. Give us a like if you were educated a little bit. We'll appreciate that. And I do look forward to doing a few more LJN videos in the future. Have a great day.